Welcome to Order Militarist Radio TV. We here are lifelong Catholics. What we do here is all for free in love of Jesus Christ and the Most Holy Trinity and His Holy Church, and to defend our Holy Mother, the Church. Our work is the true sense of apostolate. Any funds raised goes back into this work for equipment. This helps us to give you unbiased, hard-hitting truth that is not controlled by political correctness or interest groups. Today's topic is the Christian Feast of All Hallows Eve. We welcome Brother Alexis to the show.
Hi, AJ. Thank you for having me back on Order Militaris Radio. It's always a pleasure and honor. And talk about this thing that we celebrate every year and what is it all about. And there's a lot of so start, AJ. Where should we start from? You want to?
So, where does everything begin to change from what we know, how we used to celebrate the Feast of All Souls, to how it became into all this occult type stuff that we see today?
The history of Halloween, as far as I know, goes back to like the 8th century in France. In a certain monastery, they started celebrating a feast for the dead, remembering the dead, all that had died in the previous year. And they did that in November. And became very popular in Europe, All Souls Day. And that led to the rise of the feast for All Saints Day, at which the day before, because, well, if we're going to pray for all the dead, we should at least pray to all those who've made it to heaven. Because when we Catholics say we're praying for the dead, we're praying for the poor souls in purgatory who have been judged by Christ at the hour of their death to be worthy of heaven, but they still have some small debt to pay. Okay, and so they're in purgatory. So in many languages, they don't call it poor souls; they say we're the holy souls, to point out that these are not ghosts that come back to haunt you. These are devout Catholics and who just have some debts to pay. And the feast, the vigil of All Saints Day, was called All Hallows Eve. That means all the Holy Saints Eve, the vigil of the Feast of All Saints. I'm telling you, they call it Ogni Santi. They have different names. It's such an ancient feast. The word for it is changed throughout the centuries. And it's kind of like once Latin, it's kind of changed in dialects. And on the Feast of the Vigil of All Saints, in the English Isles, they would dress up and scare away the evil spirits in a kind of a popular celebration of the exorcism, because the Feast of All Saints was the triumph of light over darkness, the triumph of the sons of God over the evil spirits. And so the Vigil of All Saints was especially a powerful day for doing exorcisms. And while the popular tradition set after the English Reformation separated pretty much from Christianity, and we have the celebration, the folk celebration called Halloween, and people don't remember that Halloween means All Hallows Eve. And the Protestants certainly didn't remember it. And it was just, well, it was a commercialized event where kids would go around trick-or-treating, door to door, dress up in all kind of costumes and ask for candies. And when I was a kid, there was nothing Christian about it. But there wasn't any particular diabolic thing about it. Some people dressed up as leopards, some dressed up as pirates. Occasionally, some kid would dress up as Dracula, but it was pretty rare. People dressed up as Cinderella or Shirley Temple. It was like what they do in Europe on Shrove Tuesday, Fat Tuesday. It's called Mardi Gras. They dress up in costumes, which it's in a way was a holdover from the Roman festival of Saturnalia, where you just dressed up in hospitals. Just a fun public event. And then I was in the 70s, I think. They started running stories that people were putting razor blades in candied apples. You shouldn't let your child eat a candied apple. You should only eat manufactured candy that comes from big companies producing it. Nothing made at home. Don't eat that cookie. It could have LSD in it. And they ran all kinds of stories of this. And boy, you didn't get any candied apples after that or cookies. You just got manufactured cheap candy. And as the years went on, well, it just got cheaper and cheaper. And boy, you can barely eat that stuff they call candy today. It's not at all like what we had as kids. Well, I grew up, so I didn't follow much Hollywood. I didn't follow Halloween much after that, after college days. So maybe this is where you pick up and remember what Halloween was like when you were a kid, AJ.
Yeah, it was about 90s into the 2000s where all of those nice little costumes of Shirley Temple, all those things were done away with for uh, uh the scary stuff. Yeah, they had costumes literally to dress up as Satan himself, witches, werewolves, Dracula, not the real Dracula, but the one with the fangs and drinks blood and the living dead, or they have costumes to make you turn yourself into a living mummy, all that junk. And it was about that time in the late 80s, early 90s when the occult was starting to come around pretty good with the Satanists and all that other junk. But when we look at this holiday, there used to be cakes given out. And in reading about the history of the cakes, you see how it turns from a very Christian celebration into something darker with these cakes. So that's why I was thinking, when did all this from the Christian side turn into something darker? And I must say the cakes sound good. So
Well,
what are
they
yeah.
still make them in parts of Europe, and the All Souls Day cakes are in Sicily at least. They're kind of a fluffy kind of cookie, and they're delicious. They're made with allspice and ginger and pepper and molasses and sugar, and you guess the kind of cookie that you just can't stop eating. They're very good, and they were made and given to the kids at the cemetery. Well, in Italy, still, it's a big tradition, especially in southern Italy, to spend almost all of November 2nd in the cemetery praying for your deceased. Well, because Italians all come from, generally speaking, they live in the same town their whole life, so their grandparents are there, their great grandparents, their parents, their cousins, their second cousins, great aunts and uncles. So you could spend a whole day visiting parts of the cemetery. And I mean, it's absolutely amazing to see. The cemetery has like 1,000 people in it. The cemetery turns into a city, because you always wonder for the rest of the year, why does the Italian cemetery look like a city? It has like streets, and there's big mausoleums like little houses. But on November 2nd, you know why it's called a city. It's just absolutely full of people, and you can't park within like a half mile of the cemetery. There's cars all over the place, and well, everyone's buying flowers for the dead and putting out. They now use electronic candles, and it's not like they go there and start weeping and lamenting. There's masses several times at a little chapel in the cemetery, and people will meet one another and they'll talk about their dead, and they'll bring some flowers and clean out the things. The Italians have a beautiful custom of getting in ceramic a picture of their loved one and putting it on the place of burial, which is usually a coffin-sized slot in a big concrete wall, faced with beautiful marble. And so you can actually see the pictures of everyone as you're walking by. It's very, very touching, at least not just their names.
Yeah. So The practice of giving and eating soul cakes continues in some countries today, such as Portugal, where it is known as Pau por Deus. It occurs on All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, as well as in the Philippines. In other countries, the origin of the practice of trick-or-treating. In the United States, some churches during All Hallows Tide have invited people to come receive sweets from them and offered to pray for the souls of their friends, relatives, as they do so. So among Catholics and even Lutherans, some parishioners have their soul cakes blessed by a priest before being distributed. In exchange, the children promise to pray for the souls of deceased relatives of the givers of the month of November, which is the month dedicated especially to praying to the holy souls. Any leftover soul cakes are shared among the distributing families or are given to the poor.
They're absolutely delicious cakes, and it's a beautiful tradition that we don't have in the United States. At least I've never seen any parish that I know of, not even the ethnic ones. Mostly because there's few Catholic cemeteries in the United States. In most dioceses, Catholics are buried with unbelievers in public cemeteries, which is not what Catholics should always be buried in consecrated ground with only Catholics. But it used to be that only Catholics could be buried in Catholic cemeteries, and now the crazy bishops in the last 20 years have been allowing non-Catholics to be buried there. So what's the point anymore? And but it is a beautiful custom, and these are sacred days. These are holy days on the vigil of All Saints and All Souls Day, and you can actually obtain a plenary indulgence for the 9 days, or I think 8 days, from November 1st to November 9th. And if you visit a cemetery and say the Creed and the Our Father, Hail Mary, and pray for the dead, if you're in the state of grace and have gone to confession, broken your attachment to any vice you might have, and receive the Eucharist within 7 days before or after. And you could get a plenary indulgence every day. It's one of the most indulgenced periods of I think it's the only week you can get a plenary indulgence every day for doing something in particular like that in the whole church's calendar. So, to start it all off is the beautiful Feast of All Saints. I love the Feast of All Saints. It's the day I took my vows, because it's the day that reminds us why God made us. He made us not for this world, but this world to come. And our whole life should be lived so that one day we can celebrate All Saints Day with the saints in heaven. And that's the whole purpose of life. And we forget this. This is a feast that is usually forgotten and run over, and people don't pay it much attention. Thankfully, this year it falls on a Sunday, so everyone gets to. No one miss. If you go to church, at least on Sundays, you won't miss it. Although in many parts of the world, you can't go to church anymore because of this crazy scamdemic. But this demonic turn, I've noticed in the last 20, 30 years, it started with like, in the 70s, there was in the 60s and the 70s, there was the occasional horror movie. There was the horror sci-fi. Then there was, in the 80s, they started coming out with the horror murder movies. And then the 90s, it became more prevalent. And it seems that as that trend of horror and films coming out of Hollywood increased, also the obsession with the demonic and the satanic. It used to be they only ran it on Halloween. Then they started running it the week before. Then they started running it in mid-October. Then they started running it in the beginning of October. Month all year round. These whole channels that are just horror, and they're all satanic. And it was pretty obvious that what they're trying to do is inculcate Satanism with children. Harry Potter did a lot to that, to promote witchcraft among kids. And there's even card trading games that are all satanic, that are just for children, and that are supposed to be quite popular, to introduce children to the occult even when they're 6 or 8 years old. And this, I think, the transformation of Halloween from the normal feast to the satanic celebration is a way of just the Freemasons unveiling their Satanism and bringing it out into the public.
Yeah. I noticed that there's been a lot more movies, horror movies that are being made, but they aren't fictional anymore. They're making movies about the colonial towns in America, or some farmhouse in Pennsylvania or something, and telling what happened to these families or whatever, and turning it into movies to share all this satanic stuff that came upon all these families on the East Coast. I was like, man, there has to be something wrong with the East Coast if there's so many true stories being made in the movies.
They're trying to teach people that Satanism is true, and it's, you know, there's evil spirits out there, and they're more powerful than God. I think that's the general thing. The movies, The Exorcist, that came out in the 70s, was a big promoter of that, and you had that was a very controversial film. A lot of Catholics were against the film being made. They said it glorified evil. Others said it was authentic, but it's not authentic. The scenes in it were not authentic at all. It always made the devil look more powerful, and it's certainly not. And but when people abandon Christ, they fall under the power of the devil. And people who have abandoned God and under the power of the devil, pretty sooner or later, they know they're under the power of the devil. And once they know that the demonic is real, then they are terrified. I had a friend in high school, fell away from the faith. And we were talking one day, many years later, when we just happened to meet in the same city far away. It was quite a surprise. We'd run into one another. And as I sat down at his house and we talked about things like exorcism, he was very interested. And I said, well, maybe he's going to come back to the faith. He's so interested in exorcism. But then he said to me, but none of this is true. It's all fantasy, isn't it? I said, no, certainly is not. These things are true. And at that thought, he took such a great fear got into him. He was like, we got to change the subject. I don't want to talk about this anymore. He was terrified because he knew, having fallen away from God, there was under whose power he was, and it was just too frightening. To weak us who are faithful to God, remain faithful to God, say our of God in the church, we shouldn't be afraid of evil because we've already conquered it by turning towards God. Okay, and the devil can't have power over you if you are faithful to him. But for people who are not, they become obsessed with it so much. You know, I think this is why a lot of people like wearing the mask, the medical mask, which has now become, in Italy at least, you don't have to wear the medical mask. You can wear any piece of cloth that covers your nose and thing, and there has become almost like the fashion. And the men, especially the young men, are all wearing black over their faces. And I think they would only do that if you've already abandoned the grace of God and somehow you take delight in dehumanizing yourself. And this is all part of Freemasonry. The Freemasons have totally dehumanized themselves. They're worshiping the devil, and they want to bring out what goes on in their lodge in public.
Yeah.
And Halloween has become an instrument of that, to teach children.
Yeah, it was in the start of the 1800s to about 1899 when they took the Christian practice of handing out the soul cakes to get people to pray for the deceased, and then they somehow infused it with paganism, make it what it's like today. You know, not about the soul, not caring about the poor souls in purgatory, but just give me the food, give me this. And they called it souling. SOULING.
The way to undo all this is to teach children right. Make sure you always go to Mass on November 1st if it's available, and take your family to the cemetery where your loved ones are buried, however far away that is, on the 2nd, and pray for the dead. Say the rosary together. Say some other prayers like pray to the saint patrons, and have masses said for the dead. I'm surprised how many Catholics do not have masses said for the dead. And once you make that a practice, then your children will get involved in Halloween again. They'll realize it's just become just a silly pagan celebration, and the real thing is to sanctify the days with prayer. And you can help the dead by not only praying for them or fasting, but also giving alms to the poor. And this is what the soul cake's all about, because before modern times, only the wealthy could afford, an upper class could afford making the soul cakes. And if you giving them to poor was an act of charity, because you never ate anything made.
Yeah. So I found that interesting. And now cakes, I mean, the cakes are just allspice, nutmeg, cinnamon, ginger, sugar, 3 egg yolks, put raisins or currants in it. Then when you get all that mixed up with some milk, you roll it out into form cakes and you cut them with a biscuit cutter. You take a knife and make the sign of the cross into the dough. Then you put the raisins, more currants into the cross, and you bake it. And you hand them out. But like I was telling brother when I was studying up for the show, I was like, I doubt the priest is going to bless these cakes anymore because of COVID. Right? You can't even supposed to be in here.
Yeah, I know. Well, why the clergy have lost the faith is another topic for another show, but it doesn't prevent us from practicing the faith in family and keeping up these ancient traditions. You had a pretty strange experience when you were in public school with Halloween once, didn't you, AJ? Didn't they almost like forcibly indoctrinate you, and
Yeah,
you used Halloween to do it?
they made sure that when I was in grade school that Halloween in grade school you could not come to school as anything but a monster or a serial killer. And so
That
yeah, so fourth grade I was like, okay. So I went with my mom. We went to Walmart, went to the costume aisle. Like, man, there's some good costumes here. Batman, cowboy, Indian. But nope. The only monster thing they had there was Dracula. And I tell you, those fake teeth were so uncomfortable. And the shoes, everything, the clothing was uncomfortable. Everything, yeah. And you had then Halloween, you had to walk around town in the Halloween parade and go by the different businesses and they would give you the treats and stuff. But at night, that was something else. So I take off all that garb and just get ready to go to bed. And I go up into my top bunk where I sleep. And about 12 o'clock, 1 a.m. in the morning, I'll wake up like, man, I gotta go to the bathroom. And I have the light on outside in the hall so I could see and not be afraid of the dark at that time. I wake up, look up, and I look across the hall. Why the heck is the other bedroom door open? That thing was shut. I was like, okay, those are red eyes. I'm going back to bed.
it is. There are a lot of. I think now it's pretty regular that all kinds of witches' covens get involved in doing hexes and ceremonies on Halloween, and sacrifices of animals, and even in some cases sacrifices of humans. It's not a safe night to be out in certain parts of the world. And we cannot exclude the fact that their wicked deeds might be invoking or conjuring evil spirits. And the one thing they attempt to obtain through like black masses and satanic rituals is that devils come to inhabit or patrol certain places. And this is why if it should happen that anywhere around you there is some question that some satanic ritual is performed, you should have a priest come and exorcise the place, because these things aren't make believe. Okay. And I think this is basically what Bergoglio has been doing in the Vatican for 7 years, holding black masses and trying to conjure all the power of darkness he can possibly get there, because he's preparing for the coming of the Antichrist, and he believes that's his mission in life. And I can't reveal my sources, but there's indications here in Rome that many a very great demons have been summoned to the Vatican, and they are involved in satanic rituals there to summon them. So this is not a joke. Okay, but contrary-wise, the power of Christ is infinitely more if we have good holy priests to do what we have to do. This is why the Masonic scamdemic is all about destroying the power of Christ and opening the gates to darkness, because the priests, having apostatized, having disbelieved in Christ by wearing a mask in his presence during Mass, or forcing everyone to receive communion in hand, was such as a sacrilege, have in a certain sense consecrated themselves to the devil and taken away the whole protection of the world, the worldwide global network of protection, which is the holy sacrifice of the Mass and a holy priesthood. And it's leaving us open to demonic possession and demonic influence, which is probably the first reason why so many people just can't take the mask off and can't stop turning the television off, and just have lost all kind of psychological independence and freedom, and just do whatever the government's telling them to do, even if it destroys their life, their business, their economy, or their nation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's definitely Masonic and diabolic.
Yeah. So when it hit 5th grade, and I was like, I ain't dressing up in 5th grade, and neither did my best friend Lee. And he's like, you know, I ain't going to dress up. And it's like, I did bring some. It was still at the time when you could bring, you know, styrofoam fake weapons, you know, for Halloween stuff. That was allowed. So he's like, what? I got 1X. You got another. We're good. We got something. So we went around like the executioners.
Yeah.
But I always wondered about those satanic costumes and jewelry, because the Dracula thing had a medallion, a red medallion, but the outside was gold. I was always wondering about those things. Like, I wonder if there's something more behind it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not something you want your children to dress in nowadays, and because what is in it and what is behind it, you know, especially since most of these costumes, well, they used to be made in China, and with the embargo now, not where they're being made, but thankfully, maybe during the COVID mania, they're not celebrating Halloween anymore for not being infected by the virus, but the movies, the TVs are just full of all kinds of satanic films, even more so. And when they really should be making films about the First Crusade and the great achievements of the saints.
Mm-hmm. So when I was approaching Halloween this year, I was like, so you want to dress up like the real Dracula and go around as Dracula? Okay, dress up like this guy, be a Christian hero. Vlad the Dracula.
Yeah, the real Dracula was a Christian hero. Vado Dracula. He was not a bloodsucker.
Mm-mm.
And he was a great warrior for Christian liberty against the Muslims.
Yep. And I noticed that in the Protestant Bibles, they don't like this verse, but it's in the Catholic Bibles from 2nd Maccabees. And so betaking themselves to prayers, They besought him that the sin which he had committed might be forgotten, but the most valiant Judas exhorted the people to keep themselves from sin, for so much as they saw before their eyes. But it happened because of the sins of those that were slain. And making a gathering, he sent 12,000 drachms of silver to Jerusalem for a sacrifice to be offered for the sins of the dead, thinking well and religiously concerning the resurrection. For if he had not hoped that they that were slain should rise again, it would have seemed superfluous and vain to pray for the dead. And because he considered that they who had fallen asleep with godliness had great grace laid upon for them.
It's so Catholic that the Protestants blush at it. And this is one of the passages in written before the coming of Christ, which just completely devastates the entire Protestant system, which has eliminated the Mass. They eliminated the whole concept of propitiatory sacrifice, eliminated the concept of purgatory, and eliminated the whole concept of praying for the dead.
Mm-hmm.
And this also condemns the Orthodox, who say there's no purgatory. Well, if there's no purgatory, where are these people we're praying for? They're not in heaven, and they're certainly not on earth. So where are they? So a wonderful passage. And elsewhere it says it's a good and holy thing to pray for the dead, that their sins may be forgiven them. That's also another passage in Maccabees. And that book was written about 120 years before Christ's incarnation. So it's not like Catholics made it up, you know. So a wonderful thing. So I encourage everyone to pray for the dead. That's important. We should pray for the dead. This is an important duty. One great saint says, once you're dead, you're not going to get anyone to pray for you if you haven't prayed for anyone. It's one of the laws of purgatory.
Yep. So before we go, we should probably talk about the difference for praying for the dead. And people like, isn't that talking to the dead divination? I'm like, okay, so what's the difference?
Okay, so you should never talk to the dead. Okay, because you never know for certain whether someone's in heaven or hell. So who are you talking to? Now, we make a distinction. If you have a beloved relative who died faithfully as a Catholic with the sacraments, you might say, you know, if it was your deceased father, Dad, if you can help me, please help me. Okay. But you add always the proviso, if you can help me. And of course, on the condition that he's in heaven. If you're in heaven, can you help me? Or in purgatory, and you can help me. You don't start talking to the dead because another voice can answer you. Okay. And then because you can't discern whether the voice is of the dead or of the demon, you can easily be led astray. And if you want to be led astray, there's a lot of devils out there just waiting in line to do it. So don't ever talk to the dead, but always at least say, you know, it's safer prayer would be, Lord Jesus, if my loved one can intercede for me before your throne, please grant that they do so for the following reasons, you know. And but it's always pray. We should pray to the canonized saints and the beatified blesseds, and not talk to the dead or try to get knowledge of the past from the dead or the future from the dead or the favors from the dead. These are all pagan practices, and it's actually a mortal sin. Okay, but this is not the same thing that. Well, I'll give you an example. This old lady I knew in southern Italy, her husband had passed away, but she said, one day I had a dream, and he said, and in my dream, I spoke to him. I said, how are you doing? He says, I'm doing pretty well, but there's, I'm not yet in heaven. I still have some debts to pay. She says, what do you need? He said, I need a bottle of wine. So the next morning, the woman woke up and thought this was a very strange dream. And a poor person knocked on her door that morning and asked for an alms. She says, what kind of alms would you like? And the person said, a bottle of wine. And well, you would never give a poor person a bottle of wine because you would think, well, they're probably a drunk, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the woman remembered her dream, and she gave this poor person a bottle of wine. So the next night she had a dream, and she saw her husband again, and she said, how are you? She said, thank you for the bottle of wine. In other words, thank you for the merit of the charity you gave to the poor that you applied to my soul, because now I'm in heaven. So these things do matter. And in the life of Padre Pio, he saw a Franciscan novice once in church, wandering it at nighttime, and he says, "Why?" And he says, "No one's prayed for me." And he asked the friar's name, and Padre Pio looked it up, and this friar had died 90 years before in novitiate, and no one had sufficiently prayed for him. So Padre Pio said a whole week of masses for him until he appeared to him again and said, "Now I'm in heaven, thank you." So some of our loved ones who've died decades, even centuries ago, even millennia ago, could still be in purgatory because no one's praying for them. And this is our duty in November in particular. So much so the church approves of this, that November 2nd is the only day other than Christmas in which every priest can say 3 masses. And so there are usually 3 masses said by every priest on November 2nd.
So, folks, remember your loved ones, all your loved ones, from centuries ago. Yeah, centuries ago.
And we have a lot of them because every time you go back one generation, you double the number of relatives you have. So if you go back 1,000 years, we probably all sharing pretty much the same relatives. That may not be true, but here at the Ordo Militaris Catholicus, from the 2nd of November to the 6th of November, we'll be having a mass every day for the Catholics who were killed in the explosion at Beirut, because who remembers them? The 270 or so who were killed instantly. Not all of the 170 were Catholics, but for those who are, we're having the masses said, and we're doing that for the next couple months. And that's one way that we're offering kind of humanitarian aid that no one would offer. And but you should have masses said for your beloved dead. So if you hadn't a mass said, you should have a mass said every year for like your deceased grandparents or parents. I know my mom always used to do that, and it's a wonderful occasion if they're still saying mass, and if you can get to church, to remember your loved ones who passed away.
Yeah. I haven't been because of the rules by the bishop of face covering and receiving the. I was like, nope.
Yeah, these bishops, they don't know the kind of hell they're meriting for these crazy rules that have no reason to anything, because an influence has never killed you and it won't kill you.
Yeah. So, anything else?
Let's stay true to our Catholic faith and our Catholic traditions. Don't slide into the worldly customs. And for this reason, try to remember the saints tomorrow, and remember the dead on Monday. And it's a wonderful practice to talk about those who passed away and all the good qualities they had and the good counsel they did. This is a wonderful conversation piece in the family because it passes down a lot of lessons that we wouldn't otherwise know, and share it in the family. And at the same time, it reminds us to pray for them, and at least say a rosary in the family for the dead.
Yep. Yeah. We'll be waiting for him to get back here, folks, before we close it. So, if you can get to mass and you have mass available without all this COVID restrictions, have the masses said. Um, even do the long forgotten Gregorian masses.
Yeah, 30 days of masses for a soul. Mm-hmm. You should have that done for all your parents, your grandparents, your great grandparents, because who's had it done for them?
Yeah. So please like and share this program. To make a donation to Order Militaris Radio TV, you have to mail it in. So on your check, you address the check to Order Militaris Inc. In the memo section, you put Order Militaris Radio TV. And to find a mailing address is on the ordo-militaris.us website. Go to the contact page. You'll see the mailing address. And the mailing address is now on the show page of all of our pages until we find some online payment that won't block us.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on for this program about All Saints and All Souls.
This is Ordo Militaris Radio TV signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.